What's up, Bitcoiners? Let me just have a look. Lights are a little weird today. As you noticed, it's very dark here. Let me just make sure the audio cut out before I got on. We're good. Dark, but the sun is up, right? You can tell the difference between pitch black and having a sun. We got a sun, right? And even better, Bitcoin is running. So let's just have a coffee, talk about all the news, talk about the outlook for 2023. That's the thing that everyone's doing. 2023, tasting great, tasting great. Looks pretty gloomy in Toronto, Justin says. Good thing we know the sun is behind all that fog. Indeed, indeed, the sun is there. Good morning, Bitcoin Pilgrim. Good morning, Monty. Good morning, Bud. Morning, Dex. Morning, Daniel. Morning, P-Man Van. Another day, another sat. Indeed, indeed. So today I'm going to do a bit of an outlook, right? We're going to talk about 2023. Everyone's doing outlooks right now, end of the year business. But first, we need to talk about the New York Times. Everyone criticizing the New York Times these days. What's going on over there? They're pumping out fake news, PSYOPs, SBF. What is it, right? What's going on? Well, finally, they printed some good news. Here's a headline from the New York Times, right? Talking about all that's going on in the world. Twitter accounts that were banned, then reinstated after Elon Musk's takeover, are tweeting again. Many users are posting about topics that got them barred in the first place: COVID skepticism, election denialism, and QAnon. Well, great, great. Thanks, New York Times. Right, that's good news. People are pretty happy. Now, the to focus on the outlook for Bitcoiners, the frame I'm going to use is a little bit about a predictive model I've used for programming events and for thinking about audience and for thinking about who's interested and what they're interested in when it comes to Bitcoin. And one of the insights that I had, and I'll sort of share it to you, is you can see human capital as it moves into Bitcoin and finds interests. So you can actually chart it through time. The original generation of Bitcoiners were the cryptographers, the folks on the mailing list that Satoshi mailed out. And of course, the people who understood what was going on. Not many people understood that the holy grail of the cryptography, private cryptography movement, from the moment it became inspired or invigorated or pushed forward by private interests and not militaristic ones. Remember, we've talked about Whitfield Diffie on the show. We've talked about the trickle down of cryptography to the individual. Of course, cryptography after World War II was illegal and counted as an arm, munitions, and all regulations around cryptographic research was counted as a munition. And that's why there were no university courses, by the way, on cryptography until the 1980s. So I mentioned maybe yesterday or a few episodes ago that my blind spot, coming from a background of science and law and politics, was cryptography, right? I didn't understand it. And you kind of had a choice at the time, in my case, 2013, whether I would study computer science, which is a separate field, or cryptography. They're not the same. So I realized right away that, because at first you're like, I don't know how to program. Can I really get into Bitcoin? But then immediately you say, wait a minute. If you do a bit of research, you see that computer science is not the big moving part here. It's a part of it, right? It's networking architecture, which we're going to talk more about. It's definitely a part, but the cryptographic elements were ones that were totally separate, and you didn't need to understand a computer programming language or even architecture necessarily. So they were the first generation, right? And the first people interested. And that's what I went and learned. I learned about cryptography. And once you start learning, you realize that there were no textbooks. Nothing really happened in the industry professionally beyond the highest levels of pushing limits and inventing things like public key cryptography. But there were no university courses. And like I said, it was banned as a munition. That's why Adam Back and the original cypherpunk movement wore those T-shirts across borders. So one specific detail on the provisioning of cryptography and cryptographic research as munitions. It was okay in America for Americans. They couldn't export it. That was the issue. So constitutionally, Americans were allowed to continue with cryptographic research and not have it count as munitions. But the minute export interests became an idea around software, whatever, it had to stop immediately. So that continued on until the 80s. And that meant that research was somewhat limited and there weren't courses you could take. Bruce Schneier, who continues to be known in this industry because he wrote the original textbook called Applied Cryptography, still the book to this day that you should read. Whitfield Diffie writes the foreword. It could be written for Bitcoiners, by the way, as far as what we got to do with government, how we have to think. It's just a 2-page foreword, but it reads as if it's relevant today exactly. So even the book itself, there's only certain parts that are relevant to Bitcoin. They explain hash functions. They explain, he is the, by the way, he is the person who invented the best analogy that I use to explain hash functions, which are breaking plates, right? He calls them the workhorse of cryptography, and they're pushed everywhere. They're implemented everywhere. They're major design pieces of cryptographic systems. And the way he describes the workhorse of cryptography hash functions is this: it's breaking plates. Very easy to break a plate, right? Easy one way. Very hard to put that plate back together to the point where you would not even know that it's counterfeit and it is the exact same plate, right? You'd have to go to the factory. You'd have to rework everything, probably melt whatever the plate is made of down. I mean, it's really complicated. It's basically impossible, right? So that's a really strong way to communicate what hash functions are to people. So breaking plates, right? The Greeks were experts, right? The Greeks were experts. So when I think of cryptographers as the original class of Bitcoin, right? It's almost like yearbook classes. It's something I'm thinking about doing for the show in 2023, by the way. In Miami, May 18th to 20th, is putting almost like a yearbook together, right? 4 or 5 names from each class of Bitcoiner, 2009, 2010, all the way through. And you'd pretty much get a sense of Bitcoin just seeing these stories and seeing these people and profiles and personalities. You'd get a real sense of the development from that, more than you would just explaining how Bitcoin has grown over the years, I think. So the original class would be folks who were on the cypherpunk list and were cryptographers, and to them, they knew that the holy grail of the work in the private cryptographic sector was creating cryptographically based money. That's what they're all after. They knew if they could do that, everything else would fall into place and they would be better off. They wouldn't just be subordinate to normal corporate CEOs if they figured out and the corporate structure. And as it was, cryptographers were just seen as another kind of technical piece in a corporate structure that was definitely subordinate to CEOs in the same way that marketing would be subordinate to CEOs, right? It wasn't really the driving engine of any decisions inside of a company for the most part. Those were all still made by normal corporate minds. So the cryptographers knew that if they changed the money, it would actually change the orientation of most of these companies, and the cryptographers and designers of these systems would have more say in how they're built and have more input on overall security by design, which is what they had been talking about from the start. So what do we see? That was all a communications effort, right? That you can either speak in secret, you can use this technology, and you'd be capable of let's say, averting any form of government supervision of what you're saying, right? So remember, Bitcoin as a commodity, as a technology, is so different than the other cryptocurrencies because it already stands on the right side of American law in that it is speech. So in America, and I've said this, I did a keynote at South by Southwest in 2019 at the bottom of the market, right? It was, I think Bitcoin was $3,000 at the time. And I did it with Willy Woo. It was Willy Woo and I. And one of the main things we were talking about was this idea that if ever we get into trouble, Bitcoin can always back up into freedom of speech provisions within the US Constitution. And that meant something different for us than other coins and for the entire possibility of its development. So it really falls into that communications element, and look at what's happened since Elon. This is one of the Outlook pieces. Look at what's happened since Elon bought Twitter. Forget about the network architecture, telling secrets, the capacity to tell secrets, privacy by design, all those things for a second, and just think about open-aired conversation and not psyops and not manipulation. Finally, yesterday, and this might sound humorous, but it's actually a big thing, right? It's actually a big thing related to our mental health and our ability to communicate and our ability to get along. So you saw all these race baiters recently with Avatar, right? Oh God, this is all just blue face, they called it, right? It's blue face. Well, Twitter has actually taken to correcting and adding comment along the same lines that we described really originally with the community notes, where you take aggregate opinion. If there is a widely held aggregate opinion and not a troll opinion, so not the one that's upvoted the most, because that is prone to troll behavior. If you can get something upvoted, like on Reddit, or even in the way Twitter architecture can work when it comes to ratioing people, right? That all is relative to trolls and how they operate, which is a separate subject altogether. What they did with the community notes thing was they allowed for widely held opinions to count for more. So that means if they see it coming from the two solitudes of Republicans and Democrats, or whatever the issue may be, if they see a diverse opinion, that will weigh more and will actually help form a counterpoint in the community notes setup within Twitter. So all these blue face people going, right? Kathia Wood says, at some point, we got to talk about the cultural appropriation of Avatar and white actors are cosplaying as people of color. It's just a mess, and so not necessary, and no amount of visual effects CGI is going to erase that. Bad lace fronts, dry synthetic braids, Jesus, fix it. So the community notes come in and say, the fictional characters pictured are an alien race called the Na'vi. The visuals in the film are entirely computer generated. Na'vi characters were voiced by Zoe Saldana, CCH Pounder, Wes Studi, and Lons Alonso, none of whom are white. That's pretty good. Right? That's pretty good. Next, here's just the idea of SBF and what it's done to Bitcoiners who already weren't radicalized, let's say, Bitcoiners who already knew the New York Times was a scam, knew mainstream media was a scam. That wasn't everyone, right? There were still some people who were like, this is fun, this Bitcoin thing, and we're gonna slowly move ahead, and we're gonna make a bit of money, and it'll be great. Well, those people were in for a rude awakening when the FTX thing came, because the gaslighting from the New York Times and the expert class was obvious. Now, it isn't always gaslighting. Sometimes they're just stupid and wrong. And here's one of these expert people, right? These experts that we hear about all the time, right? This guy's name is Justin Hendricks, and he writes for Tech Policy Press, right? Tech Policy, it's like a really serious thing, right? Justin Hendricks is the CEO and editor of Tech Policy Press, a new nonprofit media venture concerned with the intersection of technology and democracy. Previously, he was, and then he just goes on to all of these credentialist fiat positions that he ever had. But he's really smart, whatever, right? He does one of these things too that I'll warn you against, right? You're free to do it. You're free to do it. I'm just telling you how it looks to me. One of these people who does their profile picture and they're like looking off in the distance, because they're so serious. They're so smart and serious, right? So one of those guys. So he's taking issue with this whole branding of TikTok as digital fentanyl. All right. So this is an expert. This is an expert trying to debunk what I think is excellent branding, right? Digital fentanyl. If you don't know where that even comes from, it comes from Niall Ferguson, who I think is a real ally to Bitcoin, by the way. He's an economic historian. He launched an algorithmic stablecoin recently. We're going to talk about stablecoins in a second. I've booked him for shows. I enjoy talking to the guy. Really interesting. I mean, you can't get much better than economic historian as far as Bitcoiners are concerned, because he brings a really good perspective. I don't think he's definitely into Bitcoin, but he's got some taste for crypto and experimentation and all that stuff. I think he'll come to fully on our team shortly. So he's one of the people who invented this. Scott Adams grabbed it really early, so it's hard to even say who invented the digital fentanyl moniker. But it looks like historically it was slightly ahead. So this guy, Justin Hendricks, goes on and on and on about a big, long article, right? About how this is all just, he compares it to the normal, like he goes and he gets some expert scientists, right? Experts. And they go on and on about addiction and how it works and is it like normal things where you get addicted? And everyone knows social media is a dopamine thing, right? We talk about that all the time here, the dopamine dealers and we got to beat them, right? Those are the enemies of Bitcoin. The enemies of Bitcoin are the policymakers, the banksters, and the dopamine dealers, right? The dopamine dealers are one of our worst enemies, maybe worse than all of them, right? A really big deal. But he gets blinded here. He just starts talking about the technicality of addiction. Now, on this show, we don't talk about the technicalities of addiction. Addiction is the operating system. You can't avoid addiction. There's no way to do it. The whole human brain is set up for rewards and to know that it gets rewarded for a thing and to repeat the process. There's literally nothing you can do about addiction. There's nothing you can do other than choose good things to be addicted to, like Bitcoin, like the show. Let's get addicted to the show, right? Get addicted to morning sunrise and coffee and talking about Bitcoin. Addiction is the operating system. We look for patterns, we look for systems, and we repeat them. And addiction even has a weird quirk that it gets heightened when you don't get the thing you want, right? If you don't exactly get the hit you want, that's where you want to get more and more and more. So where this guy gets it wrong is he goes on to this literal thing about whether it is addictive or not, as if there is even a debate about a social media app that is pure dopamine being addictive. And he says, well, the experts say there's a bit of a nuance and this and that. How much credibility does anyone give people like that anymore if they've been in Bitcoin for a while, right? I mean, the answer is none. The answer is zero. The answer is zero. But the good news is more people are starting to see it that way, because this guy misses the point, right? It's not about the technical definition of whether or not it's addictive or not. And he's spending all of his time finding out, to what degree is that true? Is it a 7 on the addiction scale or is it an 8, really boring stuff, really boring stuff. The real question that he never even bothered is the fentanyl part is not really, it's just a powerful image. He never even talked about the brainwashing, right? We don't give two shits about TikTok's data integrity, data security. That ship is gone, right? That horse is out of the barn. We can't sit around and say which company has our private data now and get worried about it. They all have it. It's over. It's already out there, right? The whole social security system corrupted. The numbers are everywhere. Share it if you want. It doesn't matter. Someone has it. They can buy it. All the personal information is out there, all of it, right? If you're the one person who didn't share everything online, good for you, right? But everybody else did. So this idea of data integrity as if it's still vital is very stupid, because it's out there. And this idea of whether it's like a super addictive thing technically in the brain with dopamine delivery or just normal addictive, also stupid and boring. They're not even covering the real question. It's about brainwashing. It's about brainwashing, right? We look at the whole thing with Twitter, right? Wow, look, governments learned that they can use social media to influence behaviors and shape thought. You think China didn't know that? You think they're the dumb ones here that don't know that you can weaponize social media to brainwash people? Of course they know, right? And now Bitcoiners know too, right? So the outlook for us on this is really good. Really good. And it looks like it's going to create more people in our ranks. It's going to drive more people to us, because you can't have this conversation well in mainstream media. You just can't. They're not going to be able to cover it. They can't cover it. The politicians barely understand it. They barely understand it, right? And it's not because they're being paid off or anything. They're too stupid. They don't understand this stuff, right? We're not sending our best to DC. We know that, right? Even with the concept of an omnibus budget. Do you know what an omnibus budget does? That's why they do it, right? It's so that they don't have to do their job. Their job is to make choices, politicians, right? Their job is to make choices. But the problem is when you make a choice on a piece of legislation, you have to live with it. And if you go against your party, if you go against this, if you go against that, if you even go against your constituents, it's a lose situation. They can't win is what it comes down to, right? The point of a politician is to go make decisions, like on a good day in politics, on a good day, and I'm someone who worked in it, right? And this is something I lived by. We used to talk about this all the time. On a good day, you get to say yes 1 time out of 10. Everyone's asking for stuff all the time. It never ends, right? That's what being in a leadership position ends up being in politics. Saying no. You have to say no. And saying no never works for you because it's often to your base, right? It's often to your base. It's often to people who like you, who want you, this and that, da, 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 da. So what do they do instead, right? They still have to say no. They can't just always say yes. So what they do is they create these omnibus budgets and they just hide behind it. Oh, it was the omnibus budget. I had to vote, right? No choice, right? That's the only way to get the little thing we wanted, was to give them what they wanted. And no one gets to say no. No one has to say no. They just do it secretly without telling you, and they all hide behind it. And so we don't even have a government. There's no government. There's no one doing their job. It's not happening, right? Omnibus budgets are a way to avoid all responsibility for their job. And if you don't have any responsibility in your job, you don't have a job. There's no job, right? Nothing. You could have no one do it and it would be the same result. Omnibus budgets. Omnibus budgets, I've participated in them. I know how they work, right? I've seen them come through. I've been in secret rooms where you get it released and go through all the budget before anyone even sees it in the media, and you get like a briefing. You can't make any sense of it. It's just spin. It's just propaganda, right? You get your own private propaganda talking points before the budget is even released. And this was a major point of contention within the administration I worked for, because like all political parties, there's a division inside, and some people wanted really small government and didn't want the omnibus budgets. And then you get into power and you see why they're being done. And I understood immediately why they were being done, right? They don't want to say no to their own constituents, and they want to hide it. It's easy to hide it in an omnibus bill. No one knows what's going on, and no expert in the world could know what's going on in these things. Did you get what you wanted? Maybe. I don't know. Like, could be. But if you had tight legislation that was easy to understand, it's a no-win for the politicians. So they just colluded together on both parties to pass things that relieve them of their duties and responsibilities and all that stuff. Of course, this is only possible in a fiat system where the money isn't countable or accountable. There's no other way. That's how they can pass $1.7 trillion budgets, because nobody's home. Literally no one's home. No one's counting it. No one knows. Nobody knows, right? So Bitcoiners going to receive a huge influx of interesting people who look to our industry for clear communications. So I'm not even talking about the money side. This is just clear communications. And US politics as well are really going to bend towards Bitcoiners having a certain moral high ground, or a bird's eye view of how to not get psyoped, while at the same time understanding what's going on. So if you guys didn't see yesterday, the trial proceeded with Carrie Lake. And it turned out to be a very big disaster, it looks like, for the other party. So what it turns out is there's supposed to be they brought in a forensic auditor for supply chains, right? Supply chains. So Michael Saylor, remember what Michael Saylor does. You know, everyone all those years said, we're going to put supply chains on the blockchain, da, 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 da. Well, in the end, all it's going to be is Bitcoin treasury. MicroStrategy is a supply chain company, right? Everyone knows that. So I think it's going to be one of the main commercial vectors for Bitcoin as we go forward, international treasury, using the world's most sophisticated supply chain technology, right? So they brought this supply chain forensic auditor in Arizona, and she only works off of publicly available documents, right? So she's not doing any freedom of information inquiries. She just uses what's available. And what she pointed out yesterday looks like it's a case closed. So what they're supposed to have in Arizona is a tally for votes that go into a machine, and that tally is supposed to stay with the votes at every piece along the chain of custody, right? So you're supposed to confirm, let's say it's 100 votes in a bag, right? So when it leaves here, it's counted to the machine in the bag, and you get 100, it says there's 100 ballots in there. The next place it goes, they'll do the same. They'll see 100 ballots. And at the end, right, we understand that in Bitcoin, right? It's supposed to, in a chain, add up at the end, right? It's reverse auditability, right? Or auditability, I guess it's inherently reversed. It's auditability, right? So the auditability is based on these signatures, and by law, the signatures and the numbers have to be accompanying the bag of votes. They did not. There is no tally of votes. There are some signatures, but no vote tallies. So anyone at any point could have put new ballots in there, and we would have not known. There's no way to know. There's no way to know. So here's what someone, Jefferson Bailey, said about Scott Adams' observation on this. He says, Scott Adams says, this morning, I'm an election denier because I deny there was an election. With loss of chain of custody and no vote counts at polling places, you can't call what happened on November 8th an election. And I'm there, right? And I think Bitcoiners would say the same. If you had no confirmation transactions, no confirmations, right? There's no transaction. If you have no confirmations, there's no transaction, right? So this is the same thing. There's no confirmations at all, at all. It's just fiat. It's a fiat vote, right? Based on the credit of the institutions involved, which are zero credibility, right? Now, even put that back into the political lens and think about the $1.7 trillion budget and what that means. This is a huge budget, right? And Cernovich writes this, right? We are entering a new epoch. Earlier today, Republicans in the Senate joined Democrats to loot the country and forever leave the border open to drugs and human trafficking. Last night, our capital was occupied by a foreign flag. Then he predicts that organized crime and cartels will begin carving up parts of the country. This is already happening in New York City, LA, and San Francisco, except people are too stupid to understand it. And look, it's happening before our eyes, right? It's happening before our eyes. But the good news for Bitcoin is, no one is going to look to these institutions to fix anything. Even if it goes south in Arizona, there's a chance it does, right? I watched, one of these body language people. I love these body language people. You guys ever watch the body language people? They're great. I want to bring one of these body language people to Miami. There's one in particular that's great. She's a girl. I don't know if you've caught her on YouTube. She actually is a Bitcoiner, and wow, she takes Litecoin and Ethereum too on her thing. But you see her mention Bitcoin stuff regularly, and she always analyzes JPow when he comes out and does his stuff. So I feel like she's on a similar bent to Bitcoiners. Anyway, I love her content. And she was analyzing the whole courtroom dynamics and scene yesterday and put it up right away. A little bit of stuff she was concerned about the judge and the state. Just little things, bracing. Nothing to really be keyed in on, except let's not assume that nobody's corrupt already. Let's not assume that in Arizona, right? I think that's all I mean by that. But here's the thing. Bitcoiners understand the argument better than anyone in the world because it is about the architecture that Bitcoin is built from. Inherently, Bitcoiners will understand this. And inherently, Bitcoiners understand chain of custody, consensus, counting a vote, accountability, auditing more than anyone in the world. That is fundamental to our worldview. Fundamental to our worldview. So Bitcoiners are going to get more out of Arizona, whatever happens. It doesn't matter if there's an election overturned or Kerry Lake or any of that stuff. It doesn't matter, right? Bitcoiners understand it's a scam. It's a scam, and they'll get that, right? So right away, that's opening up the divide between normal politics and Bitcoiners even greater, which I think is good, right? That's what I think is good. You could disagree, right? Now, lots of stuff. So let's go back to the class thing, right? So that's the communications piece, right? Those are communications, and if we think of that trajectory, right, the history of who came to Bitcoin and the frame that I'm using, cryptographers were first for communications, but the second, and that's what I was talking about, the J6 stuff and election integrity, were political people, right? So the first generation into Bitcoin were the cryptographers. The next were the anarcho-capitalists, libertarians, the folks who were waiting on a gold standard after the financial crisis or during the financial crisis or before the financial crisis, the folks who were part of the Ron Paul movement and all that stuff. That's partly where I came from, right? That's how I got introduced. I was not part of the cryptographers world. I only learned about Bitcoin in 2012 when I learned about the total corruption of Swift, of FinCEN, FinTrack, FATF, and all these guys, right? The whole financial surveillance cartel was one of my main subjects in 2012 and how I learned about Bitcoin. But there's a whole flood of political people who came in at the time, right? The first real pump of Bitcoin looked like private money to people who were waiting for private money. And so it created a whole rush of people into the space. And that's where I came from, right? Now, the next one that happened, and where I made my early career in Bitcoin, was the first non-sentimental generation that came, and those were the traders, right? the people who would look at Ethereum and say, well, that's possible, and the people who would look at other things and say, I could speculate on that too. And then Bitcoin weirdly did something that a lot of people don't like acknowledging, but it's just a fact. Bitcoin became the reserve currency of the crypto industry, which is always how I programmed shows and thought of it, right? Bitcoin is the subject that we can use to talk about energy, we can talk about politics, we can talk about spirituality, we can talk about worldview, but we can also talk about finance, right? It's related, of course, it's related to finance. So this whole Wall Street thing was something that I saw as a natural progression. So when I was programming consensus for CoinDesk back in those days, right? So I quit my job in the Senate, joined CoinDesk when Barry Silbert brought it and bought it to New York. And my job was to think in terms of how to get the, we were thinking of ourselves as a sell side research outfit. If you don't know much about Wall Street, sell side is like the research firms, media companies, right? That kind of thing. It was just one idea that we had, but the idea was we would go to really rich people and give them a worldview. I mean, institutional players in Wall Street, and give them an idea just through events and topics and media and all those kinds of things of what it meant for them. So there was a time in that market in 2017 where Bitcoin and crypto were still only thought of as like engineering and computer science and libertarian and all the other human migrations that have come until then, right? That's what I'm going with. We had these human migrations, human capital came, we had cryptographers and political folks. So when I brought the idea to Wall Street, and I would contact pure Wall Street people, right? Like downtown Josh Brown. What's this guy's name? Because Howard Marks is, I'm about to talk about Howard Marks, and there was a guy, Murray, he was one of the people who actually got Barry Silbert into Bitcoin. I'm trying to remember his name. He's a real Wall Street guy, right? Kind of famous in his own world. And so when I was first pitching this idea, I said, we're going to do a show just for Wall Street, in Wall Street language, right? We're not going to use any political language unless it's to describe opportunities. We're not going to use any computer science language unless it's to talk about opportunities. We're not going to talk about hash rate unless it's to talk about a key price indicator and an investment thesis. And people got it, right? They at first are like, because I would ask people if they wanted to speak in this event. They said, I'm not an engineer. I don't know anything, right? And I said, no, just for Wall Street, right? We're going to do a show just for Wall Street. Of course, this thing became a huge hit. And I even threw a dart and timed the day we had the event for the day that Bitcoin hit $10,000 for the first time. It happened on stage, right? It was really cool. And great press, and it was a hit. And then the model was copied, right? Because we could see the fit, the human capital migration was there. And right away you had this this new field and people rushing in, right? All kinds of Wall Street refugees came into crypto and did the thing. And of course, some came to Bitcoin, right? The next one that I noticed was, well, let me do these artist ones for a second. Or sorry, these Wall Street ones for a second. So here's Ryan Selkis, who I worked with at the time, right? Ryan Selkis, who now runs Masari. He wrote his 2023 Outlook today. He published it today. If you want to go see Masari Crypto, if you're interested in crypto, he does say some stuff about Bitcoin. So that's what we're going to talk about here. So he calls it, Bitcoin is outside money. I mean, we canceled a country this year. What is there to say? I mean, we canceled a country this year? I don't know what that means. Credit Suisse analyst Zoltan Pozsar, who will be, one second. Zoltan, I don't know if it's public yet. Keep it on the down low if it's not public. He'll be with us in Miami, May 18th to 20th. We haven't made any announcement. I don't know if he's listed or has been announced, but we love Zoltan. We love Zoltan. So he's covering Zoltan here. So here's what he says. Credit Suisse analyst Zoltan Pozsar is one of my favorite macro analysts to read and follow. His investment bets are always on the mark, but his mental models and frameworks for how to think about the world's dominant reserve currencies are required reading for any serious investor. Zoltan popularized a term called outside money, which is a more elegant descriptor for non-sovereign currencies than what those of us who have been into Bitcoin from the early days have been able to come up with ourselves. When the US decided to sanction Russia for, oh, okay, this is just cancel the country, yeah. For Ukraine, and more importantly, to seize its US Treasury reserves, it was a cross the Rubicon moment for crypto. Zoltan called it Bretton Woods 3. When this crisis and war is over, the US dollar should be much weaker, and on the flip side, the renminbi much stronger, backed by a basket of commodities. From the Bretton Woods era backed by gold bullion to Bretton Woods 2 backed by inside money, treasuries with unhedgeable confiscation risks, to Bretton Woods 3 backed by outside money, gold, bullion, and other commodities. After this year, money will never be the same again. And Bitcoin, if it still exists by then, he says, will probably benefit from all this. This is something we covered ourselves a little while ago. According to Zoltan, the trend towards deglobalization and onshore manufacturing, domestic supply chains, and commodity reserves would have a persistent inflationary effect. Nations outside of the US-EU alliance will inevitably, but not immediately, look to outside money like gold and other commodities instead of G7 inside money and FX reserves that slowly lose purchasing power. What he goes on to say here, though, is what he goes on to say is that basically Bitcoiners have, and he mentions Vitalik's steel man argument for the April Fool's joke, which I love, the steel man, the opposite of a straw man, where Vitalik created a powerful argument that ended up getting kind of lost in translation about how he wished Ethereum people had the mental fortitude of Bitcoiners and the ability psychologically to stick together despite all the craziness and all that. So it came off as an insult, but actually a compliment. And a lot of people still thinking about it and all that. So that's what Ryan Selkis predicts, right? So he predicted this mental piece is actually important, and that it will help Bitcoiners navigate what's happening, right? At the same time, you had Howard Marks yesterday release his 2023 outlook, and he mentions Bretton Woods 3 in it, just like Zoltan, right? So he's mentioning Bretton Woods 3, talking about what could happen if this is done. He's talking about a major shift in the world, right? So what he says is, in my 53 years, Howard Marks is Oak Tree Capital, one of the largest Wall Street participants out there, right? And generally regarded as on the same intellectual level or understanding of global finance as like a Ray Dalio or one of these guys, right? So he's generally regarded as one of the top thinkers. And just like I'm always really keen on supporting people who show their work, right? Arthur Hayes shows his work, right? He's a great writer, and that's what I mean by showing your work. Show your thoughts, put them down on paper so we can see them. Howard Marks, this fella, also does these memos to his investors that end up always getting read widely by folks just because they're interesting. So what he says is here, in my 53 years in the investment world, I've seen economic cycles, manias, and panics, bubbles and crashes, but I remember only 2 real sea changes. I think we may be in the midst of a third one today, and he shares his notes. So go have a look at it, right? We don't need to go all over the details, but in the end, what he says is Howard believes it's likely that the investment strategies that worked for the past 40 years, basically the low interest rates, easy access to credit and all that, isn't going to be the way it goes forward. And he says, we've gone from low return world of 2009 to 2021 to a full return world. And it may become more so in the near term. Investors can now potentially get solid returns from credit instruments, meaning they no longer have to rely as heavily on riskier investments to achieve their overall return targets. Lenders and bargain hunters face much better prospects in this changed environment than they did in 2009, 2021. So what he's basically just saying is old-fashioned lending money, right? Not rehypothecated lending necessarily, just lending money is going to be the big thing. So if you want to lend someone a bit of money, it'll work again because interest rates are high, and the whole world of equities and commodities, he argues, not going to make it. Not going to make in the short term. Not going to make it. This is a major sea change. Back to the old things. Now, what I see when I read that is this weird anomaly that Bitcoiners enjoy because of the creation of stablecoins. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So I always have used the frame for stablecoins as the printer, right? Printers. Why do I do that? Well, printers in the 1980s, before we had full-fledged networking capacity of our computers, um, um, printers were the thing that allowed the computer. Remember in the 80s and 90s, if you're young enough or old enough, remember there was a computer room in houses? We had a computer room. There was a room where you put the computer, and it was like an office, right? If you didn't have an office before, you often got one because you had a computer or created one in your house with the computer, and you put a printer in there. And forget about the video games for a second, and there was barely internet until 1995. What you did was you printed stuff, right? You printed school papers, you printed stuff to invite, party invitations, numbers for community boards at the grocery store. Everything about the printer was to bind the newly formed digital world to the physical analog world. It was the interface, if you will, right? So that's why, if you remember, when Steve Jobs was heavily criticized for focusing so much on the original word processing document in Apple, everyone said, wow, what are you talking about? We need like 2 fonts, right? The only class Steve Jobs ever took in college was fonts, right? Like, he loved fonts, different fonts. And people laughed, right? They said, we got to think about other things with the computer. He says, no. The font is everything. And people were surprised. They said, like I said, they needed like 4 fonts. He went, no. Hundreds. We need hundreds of fonts, and they all have to be cool and recognizable and different. And if we all remember, that was the main, if you were around in the 80s, right? You remember birthday invitations, all that stuff. That's what people did, right? They created things using word processing technology, playing around with fonts. And so he was right, 100% right. He got the market correct. It had nothing to do with plugging a computer in and being technical anymore. The hacker world was ending. It was turning into invitations, tea parties, that kind of stuff. And the printer was integral for this to happen. There was no way to bring your work and show it and create human connections and all that to be social around computers unless you were making invitations, papers for school, word processing software, etc. So it was a huge, huge important thing. Now, what happens after we have the internet and social media and all this other stuff is finally, and iPads, right? Like, I have that ridiculous printer that I'm going to shoot with a gun. That's broken, by the way. I punched it the other day, and it still prints paper, but the fax glass thing I broke it. Like, I just had enough. But I wish I could have recorded it for you. And I was only worried my gun was a little loud in the mornings. That's why I never really did it. I can't wake up my whole neighborhood with a blast like that. We go live at 7:45 or whatever. So we didn't do it. So the printers, right? The printers became way less important once we networked, right? Once we networked, things were not the same. And what is it? Please live stream the smashing outside the farm. Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that. I'll do that. Anyway, just so there you go. So the printer and stablecoins are similar in my mind, in the sense that I don't think we're going to have stablecoins, just like we don't really have printers anymore, right? We have these pieces of shit they give us, but they're not really the same thing they were back in the 80s and 90s. In the 80s and 90s, the printers worked. I don't remember them being so shitty. I don't remember them not understanding how to print a thing, right? Like, do you know how many times my stupid printer doesn't work? It's unreal. It's unreal, right? And so no one cares about them anymore. We don't really need them, and they're sort of a vestige of the old stuff you can use with social media, with our ability to screen share and take pictures and share them all around, and our phones are cameras, and there's cameras everywhere. We don't need the printers like we used to, right? It's just not important. And so I continue to think of stablecoins in that way. There is a time, and it's now, where they are important. If you saw what happened in the US dollar crunch in 2020, when the original 2-week lockdown happened, No one was able to get the dollars they required, right? So there was a huge demand for US dollars. Bitcoiners, and it wasn't individuals, what had happened was the exchanges, because they were so used to settling up with stablecoins, had no liquidity crunch, right? They were able to overcome this. And this was a really big deal at the time, right? That Bitcoiners somehow had invented something that didn't leave them vulnerable, right, to the same market forces. So lots of people said, "Wow, that's pretty cool, right? You can do that." Now, when I think of what Howard Marks said, and when I think of what Ryan Selkis says, what they're basically arguing here is that the ability to collateralize Bitcoin. So what they're saying is lending money and getting credit is, lending money, not rehypothecation, but just taking a loan, basically the old-fashioned loans, right? Are going to be important because there's interest rates involved, and it's actually now economically interesting more than it was, right? 5, 6, 7% interest rates may be worth your while, right? So what I see there is the ability for, and that's why I was such a big pro proof of reserves fella when I was at Kraken. The reason just being, if you're not working in a fractional reserve system, the most important thing is how much Bitcoin do you have that you can use to create liquidity for loans, right? Because there's no reserve lender. It's just what you have. And that's why proof of reserves is a signal of strength in a non-fractional reserve system, which means that you can have lending, and you can have all of these things. So Justin says, credit itself is not the problem. It's the opaque rehypothecation without proper disclosure. Exactly. So what I'm saying here is, now that basic credit, and look what the crypto people and Bitcoiners have learned from the disgusting display of rehypothecation, the SBFs on boxes, right? I was showing people that the Alan Farrington quote already a year ago, SBF on boxes, right? When he was describing what has become famous now, the Ponzi thing, and the relationship and the interview with Matt Levine at Bloomberg, right? If you have a box and you do this stuff, right? So on boxes, we've learned, right? We've learned exactly what Justin has just said here, right? It's not, credit is not a problem. You need to be able to borrow money if you have an idea. There's no way around it, right? There's nothing wrong with that inherently. It's, where are you lending it from? Is it real in the first place? Do you have the capacity to lend money? Where is it coming from? Right. That's all. That's all we're going to solve. But that's what has been destroyed until now. So this is what I'm saying. If this environment is so important as Howard Marks and Ryan Selkis are suggesting, then the ability to distribute loans in stablecoin off of collateralized Bitcoin, like what BlockFi did, except they're not going to take the deposits and bet them in Gemini's Forex market or Gemini's derivatives market, right? So that's the difference, right? And the good news is, all the pain from last year sets us up for basically the only trade that's going to work going forward, right? That's it. There's very little that's going to happen. I continue to think that the Fed is not going to just pivot entirely, right? They're not going to juice markets in equities again like they did. That's just where that's where I'm sitting, right? We have had such historically low interest rates that era is just over, and that's what Howard Marks is saying, and that's why he's saying that these normal, simple, basic financial transactions are important again, which is great news for Bitcoiners, because we're not here for overextended financialization. We're here for simple transactions, and if they make them simple, we're going to flourish, right? We're going to flourish. And now, how are we going to flourish? Well, that's I think where this next wave of human capital will become important. So we had the cryptographers, we had the political people, then we had the Wall Street people, right? The next one that I saw were the artists, right? The rare Pepes at the start. Now, the bummer is those Ethereum folks with all the NFTs and took a lot of that energy, right? They took a lot of that energy. And that energy won't really find a home there as much going forward as it did in the last cycle. I think a lot of that's going to come home. Now, this doesn't have to be digital art like NFTs or anything. Remember, Bitcoin has had a huge reaction to digital art because of the NFT craze and some of the vacuousness to it. Right? There's good stuff there too. I'm not to criticize what's going on there entirely, but the Bitcoiners ended up having a real appetite for physical art as a response, right? So that's why that beautiful the node thing from the one that folks have, it's so cool, right? It moves around, and if you went to Bitcoin 2022 last year, you remember the art gallery, so much physical art, right? In stark contrast to crypto, which is still all the digital stuff, and it's just a crypto art gallery for all this stuff was just a bunch of screens, and you could have a look at people's collections on screens. The Bitcoin art show was a physical art show, and I continue to think you're going to have, Fractal Encrypt. Yeah, that's the one I was going to say. Fractal Encrypt. I believe that was the Fractal Encrypt you're talking about. Yeah, precisely. So, so now look what's happening in Bitcoin, right? We've got, I just saw this yesterday, 21 futures, tales from the time chain, right? You're starting to get a lot more art in Bitcoin. Now, I don't know physical, digital, that's not really what I'm saying, right? You've got the Dergigi's, the 21, I forget what it's called. It's not his book, but it's the art thing where he's got other people. I guess Svetsky is part of it. There's all kinds of folks that are, there's all kinds of other folks that are doing it, right? So now what that'll end up translating into is it's not just the artist that I am highlighting here. There is a new specific type of artist that's going to come out of what we've seen in the artist migration to crypto and to Bitcoin. There is still one more manifestation. I think you're going to see it in 2023, which is the alchemist kind of bent, right? Where so my idea of the division between Ethereum NFT folks and the Bitcoin folks isn't just the physical art and the digital art. I think that's a good proxy, but it's not exactly that, right? It really is the consumer culture versus the fiat culture versus the high time preference and the low time, basically time preference versus consumption, right? So easy art, AI has really kind of changed all that. See all these doodlers that are like, oh shit, I can't doodle anymore. Oh, I used to make book covers. Shit, I'm out of a job, right? So it has nothing to do with the production of it anymore. The things that you're going to want are the quality, the thoughtfulness, the all those types of things. And I think this is where the Wall Street stablecoin piece comes in, and where the artists are finally going to get real traction in Bitcoin. And that's through royalties and using the Bitcoin community as a bootstrap mechanism to push art into the mainstream. We're big enough now that we are going to generate our own art that will pierce out of the Bitcoin community, maybe just because it gets people rich, right? That's okay too. So I think the combination of collateralized debt, royalty payments, collateralized money to create credit, and royalty payments will converge and create a situation where we finally have artists making real living in Bitcoin, supported by Bitcoiners, not through publishing houses, not through anything else, and have major effect on the general community, right? So that's what I'm saying, that the human migration of artists into the industry are going to pay real evangelist fruit, or real evangelist benefits this coming year. So, and how do we know? Well, I mean, the diet thing is a part of it, right? That's the alchemy part. But just look at the World Cup, right? Justin sent me this article of the day. It's amazing, right? That Messi and the Argentines brought 6,000 pounds of meat to Qatar with them, right? And everyone talking about how it's a superfood and they're the winning team and all that kind of stuff. So I think the diet things mixed with the artists are going to continue to proliferate, right? So when I say that, I would put like a Jordan Peterson, right, as like an educator. Artist it's a part of it, right? It's this alchemist bent, right? And he's just one of the people that's going to continue to push this diet thing, and what it means for our own energy levels, our own creativity, and our own taste, right? I mean, actual taste and aesthetic taste. So big changes, right? Big changes. And finally, this is the biggest and I think most important one. The political people got their stuff, right? They have a place in Bitcoin in 2023. The cryptographers continuing to proliferate, right? Getting out of the fog of war, getting out of psyops, and protecting ourselves from manipulation of communication channels. The Wall Street people, right? Lots going on there for Bitcoin in 2023 as it plays on the macro stage. Artists, right? They came set to change, set to evangelize, but this is the most important one. This is it, right? And this is what Bitcoin Miami in May is going to be all about. Very different. In the same way that I described inventing the Wall Street show for Bitcoin and crypto for the Wall Street audience, right? Not trying to engineer it, not trying to gear it towards engineers and then the Wall Street people came. This was a deliberate choice that I made to market to them in their language in a show that we got lucky, right? You should see the press we got, right? Bitcoin hits 10,000 as rammed conference parties into the night. You can't beat headlines like that, right? And we got tons of them. It was like really the feeling of a hit Broadway show when I woke up the next day after that, because it was just like love letters, right? But we're going to do the same for energy, right? We're not covering energy from the point of view of, oh, what are people investing in? That's the Wall Street angle. In the same way that we didn't cover Bitcoin from the engineering angle for Wall Street, we're not going to cover engineering or energy literacy from the Wall Street angle. We're covering it from just the energy angle. Totally different, right? Totally different. And energy literacy is going to be one of the main advantages Bitcoiners have in 2023. And our show is going to be about it. But we can already see now what's going on. Look at this Canada, Germany places. These are two of the dumbest countries in the world, right? I'm in Canada right now, full of idiots. I mean, some of the stupidest people on earth, without question, except for the Germans, who are dumber. They're even dumber, right? You had the German energy minister yesterday saying, oh, we got to just stop them from consuming, stop them from traveling, right? Already suggesting the global or the climate change lockdowns are coming, right? The serious glass is going to make you shut down. You're not going nowhere, right? They sent their chancellor to Canada this autumn, and we laughed about it on this show, right? The German chancellor, the one thing they can do is engineer shit, right? They got engineers, right? They got engineers coming out the ass. They said they'd come to Canada on our Gas Bay Peninsula, right? So when you see Canada, you can enter right in the St. Lawrence River. You can huge boats. You can't even see across the river. It's so wide up there. And we got tons of natural gas. There's nobody even there. It's empty. It's empty. Sitting out, poking out in the Atlantic, waiting to go to Europe. The chancellor himself came to Canada and sat around with Justin, and they talked, and Justin had cool socks on, and they said, what we can do, He said, I'm going to build the whole thing. I'll build it all. I'll engineer all of it for you. The port, the containers, the pipelines. We just want your liquid natural gas, and let us build it here, right? So what do we say? Canada. Good idea, guys. I got a better idea. What we're going to do is we're going to build... This is what they got. This is the deal. This is from Doomberg this morning. This is what those idiots did. Instead of building the easy thing, right? Liquid natural gas, come to our country, put a straw in the ground, and you build all the stuff, and then you pay us, and then it's also ours. We own it. You just built it, if you're a Canadian. You just built it, but we'll sell you the stuff. That's all they wanted, right? To build us a thing. Like, how about if someone came to your house and gave you this deal? I'm going to build a restaurant, and you can eat there whenever you want for free, and you own the restaurant, and you'll even get the revenue from the restaurant. All I want is to be able to come to this restaurant whenever I want. That's what they were saying, right? We said, no. Come on, you dumb people. We got to stop. Greta, what would Greta think? Right? Greta would be so unhappy about this. So this is the deal we came up with. No shit. We're going to build a bunch of wind towers in Canada where it's windy. And then the wind towers are somehow, I don't even know the science, are going to make liquid hydrogen. Liquid hydrogen is going to get produced from the wind. It's possible. So people do it, right? What they're talking about is legitimately possible. But no one's ever done this at scale. And where the hell do we put all the hydrogen? Who's even burning hydrogen right now? And I'm for burning hydrogen. I'm for burning hydrogen, but there's nothing there. There's nothing there. What is Europe going to do? This won't even get online until 2035. Wind farms and fucking hydrogen. And then they got to ship it still. It's the same shipping. They got to build a port. They got to build all that stuff, right? So energy literacy score for Canada, 0. Energy literacy score for Germany, 0. These places are going down the tank in 2023. Don't spend time there. They're shitholes, complete and total shitholes. Good for food, good to hang out. That's the end of it, right? Where should you go in 2023? Where's a smart place to spend 2023 with good energy policies? Japan. What did Japan do yesterday? Japan adopts plan to maximize nuclear energy in major shift. Japan adopted a plan on Thursday to extend the lifespan of nuclear reactors, replace the old, and even build new ones. A major shift in a country scarred by the Fukushima disaster that once planned to phase out atomic power. This is from their report. In the face of global fuel shortages, rising prices, and pressure to reduce carbon emissions, Japan's leaders have begun to turn back toward nuclear energy. But the announcement was their clearest commitment yet after keeping mum on delicate topics like the possibility of building new reactors. So they're going to extend all the lives of the ones they have. The government also pledged to develop next generation reactors. So Japan, remember, Japan, to me, is the first country that will experience hyper-Bitcoinization. It's the first country that is going to be living in the Bitcoin world. I believe that. That's why Satoshi Nakamoto's name is Japanese. Japan was the first to experiment in the way they did with their central bank. They were the first to run fiat into the ground. They're the first to understand the weaknesses of fiat. And they will be the first to understand the benefits of Bitcoin. And they'll be the first to understand the benefits of Bitcoin and integrating energy policy into it. Now, I know Texas is ahead and there's a few other places, and I think that's normal, right? Those places will continue. I don't think Japan's going to invent everything on its own. They're going to look to other places, but they're going to put it all together. They're going to put it all together. And you're going to see at some point in 2023 news about nuclear finance, small scale, and Bitcoin coming out of Japan. That's my 2023 prediction for Japan. Much better than Canada and Germany, right? Let's see. This is from news this morning. Suspected Russian spy arrested in German intelligence agency. Yeah, well, it looks like they were infiltrated a long time ago. Daniel Renault says, I think crowd health is the beginning of Bitcoin revolutionizing healthcare. Yeah, I'm just about to sign up for that crowd health thing. The open enrollment this year, I stopped. I'm done. I hate it. It's the dumbest system in the world. The American healthcare system is so stupid. I just stopped, right? So here's my new scam. I got a great scam going. It's actually pretty clever. Because I live on the Canadian-US border, I'm not using Canadian healthcare. That's for damn sure. But what I will do is just buy insurance for any catastrophe in Canada and then just pay cash in the United States. That's fine. If you pay cash in the United States, you can get a sweet deal, actually, right? So I'm just negotiating cash from now on. I don't care. I'm done with the per month and the Obamacare and all that shit. It's absurd. If there's anyone watching this that doesn't understand U.S. healthcare, I pay about $2,500 US a month for a service I never use. And then if I do use it, my deductible is $3,000. And I have as good as you can get. Like I got the good one, right? And it's a pain in the ass. It's a complete and total pain in the ass. Who has that kind of money? I'm fine. I can afford it. I've paid now for 3 years on my own without an employer, and I've never used it, and I still get bills. So I've paid almost $40,000, and I still get bills. So they can fuck off, right? not doing it anymore. Did not sign up. And I got into the crowd. A lot of the people at Bitcoin Magazine use the crowd health, and they told me all about it. And so far so good. You get to save in Bitcoin. Are you kidding me? And I also saw Saifedean is working with them. I think that should be good for them, right? I think he's a pretty good salesman for that kind of stuff. So good for Saifedean. I think that's a great deal for him, right? So awesome. You should invite Nathaniel Harmon. He's the OTech guy. Very interested in. Thanks for that note. I will get him. I'm trying to get as many people as I can. Thanks, Nolan. We are lucky to have Criddle. Thanks, P-Man Van. Been studying Bitcoin since 17. Yeah, a lot to learn here. A lot and not so much. Remember, one of the advantages of Bitcoin is that it actually should reduce your cognitive load to understand the world around you. Right? That's what we want. We don't want the world to be as complicated. And Bitcoin is simple in the end, right? You can make Bitcoin complicated. No one really even gets it if you keep going down the rabbit hole. You'll keep finding things you didn't know about and all that. So even I still have, when I'm talking with people who really understand the nuances, I'm still like hesitant. And so it's also because I came up during the scaling debates, and those were so vicious that, you better know what you're talking about when you comment on infrastructure to real passionate developers of Bitcoin. Bud, haha, I'm from Canada and there are lots of dummies. How else could you have Trudeau as your leader? Yeah, Canada. Sorry, Bud. I'm Canadian too, but I think just the nature of Canada, because it's so blessed, and Canada is a hot dog stand outside of a football stadium economically, right? And as long as people are going to the football game, your hot dog stand can't lose money. Like, it's not possible, right? So we have America sitting next to us, which makes us inherently rich and successful and all that. So we're just a person who doesn't understand real economic forces because we don't have to, right? So it's all kind of a sport to Canadians because of the natural wealth. So that's kind of what made them so stupid, unfortunately. Nathaniel sat down next to me on the plane down to the conference last year. Really wonderful guy. The OTech stuff is compelling, regardless of his opinions on climate change. Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not a. That's pretty cool, Justin. I'm not a. I'm not a. My thoughts on climate change are more or less the following. Like, there's 3 questions, right? Is it happening? Yeah, I'd say the scientists got it right. The numbers. I think they got it right. Did humans cause it? I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't even care. Let's just say they caused it, right? Let's just say it's us, and they got that right too, right? I don't really care about who's right and wrong on that. But the third question is where everything lies and where the psyop really functions. It's the effect, right? And this is where there's no consensus, and this is where I disagree with climate change people. Happening? Yeah, sure. It's not sure. Yeah. Who caused it? Yeah, fine, it's us. What's going to happen? Well, here's how you know. You want to know how we know COVID went to shit? This is why. Doctors, their field of expertise is a scientific study, the scientific method, right? So then everyone turns to doctors when there's all kinds of studies, and they ask doctors to make sense of it. Well, you know what doctors never learn? You know that class doctors take when they go to college, and it's all about analyzing data, how data is gamed, how data is manipulated, how you can use data to make a counter argument that's not true because you manipulated the data, how much data is getting flooded into an environment to destroy any point of view, right? That's not what they're taught. That's my field. That's where I come from. So when you hear people talk about climate change projections, when you hear doctors talk about, even Dr. Malone, right? Even Berenson, right? These are not people who can compare data sets. They can look at one data set. They can produce a data set. But it's like saying you want someone who's an expert in traffic and you're asking the car driver, right? The doctor is like a driver of a car. They can go in traffic, they can produce data, but they can't put data together and analyze all of it at once. And I'm not talking about meta studies or anything like that. No. The very idea of a meta study is what I'm talking about, not whether what the meta study said and how to read it and how to agree on it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how to sift through the bullshit, and that's not what they're trained in. They don't know anything about that, right? And the climate change people are the same. The reason they fail is because they can't understand innovation. No model takes into account Bitcoin centric funding for Gen 3 nuclear power plants. There's no such concept in any global warming study, right? So the last piece, the catastrophism, is everything in global warming, and so that's the only part I disagree with them on, because they just don't have any imagination, right? That's their problem. Only reason I have healthcare is because it's basically free from my employer. Otherwise, I would be on crowd health. Yeah, I don't have an employer. I left. I don't have. That's the thing. I just inherited the one I used to get from CoinDesk and Barry, and I just paid it as Cobra after. We have this thing where you pay when you leave a thing, but I'm done with it. It's stupid, right? It was the best you could get, basically. My kids are born in fancy hospitals. I got the bill for my kid. It made sense back then. Yeah, thanks, Barry. My kid, the bill came and it was like $45,000 or something for my second kid. Now, I mean, the insurance paid, but and it would have been, if you'd have paid cash, it would have been $5,000, right? But because they just inflate everything in the American system. What Bitcoin hosted a debate, what Bitcoin did, I think you mean, Daniel, hosted a debate with Harman and Steve Barber on my watch list. Yeah, I haven't seen that. Doomsayers never take into account innovation. No, they don't. That's it, Daniel. They do not. Justin says, thanks, Barry. Indeed. Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Barry. Long time ago now, but yeah, Cobra finished. All right, team. Oh, I went long today. All right. Programming note. Not sure there's an episode tomorrow or Christmas. I'll try it. If I do one, it's going to be pretty casual. I don't think I'm going to be taking too many notes into it. The reason is I'm about to get stormed stuck in Toronto, so I'm not going to where I'm going to for Christmas. And we're going to be in my sister-in-law's house here in Toronto, which isn't far. It's a great big house, but there's a million kids around. So I just don't know if I'm going to be able to get any. So it's not really, the plan changed because of the huge storm coming. So I don't think I'll leave for another 2 days. But this place that I rented is finished. And someone else is coming, I guess. So I'll be staying with my family. Great, happy, comfortable Christmas, all that. I'm just not sure I'm going to be able to set up a situation like this. I intended to have a Christmas show. I might do one just to say hi, tomorrow and have everyone have a little chat with you guys. So look out for it, but don't hold your breath, team. All right, Merry Christmas if I don't see you all, and we'll talk again soon when there's stuff to chat about. Right? All right, team. Peace.